She's a marine ecologist whose interests lie in how environmental disturbances have affected our sensitive marine systems, namely the coral reefs. She has been actively exploring Singapore's and the region's coral reefs for work and leisure over the last 10 years. So naturally, she's here to present on corals, specifically on the growth rates and patterns of massive courageous corals around Singapore. So please welcome Dr. Yani.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for having me here today. So, although I'm currently working with the Division of Earth Sciences in Earth Observatory of Singapore, I've been through a lot of the research institutes and ecology institutes in Singapore, TMSI, and DBS, and NUS, SCWA, as well as SENSA. So the research I'm presenting, the work I'm presenting today is actually a collaboration with all these different institutes. So I know I'm the last speaker before lunch, so bear with me while I share with you something about corals, the importance of their growth, and the fun stuff we can actually tell from the skeletons that they leave behind as they grow. First of all, I'd like to share with you why look at coral growth, what is so important about it. So I don't really think I need to tell you about the productiveness and the importance of coral reef ecosystems, but perhaps it'll be good to be reminded anyway. Coral reefs make up less than 0.2% of the world's oceans in area, but they are estimated to house around 25% of the ocean species diversity, which is guesstimated somewhere around 1 to 9 million species. The diversity and productivity of this reef ecosystem not only supports over 300 million people still directly relying on coral reefs for food and livelihood, but also fisheries, tourism, science, and research. Without coral reefs, I guess I really won't be talking to you here today. So to put a dollar value to things, it's been estimated that coral reefs in this region has provided over $30 billion and benefits of worth of benefits in goods and services. And I read somewhere this valuation has recently gone up to somewhere around $100 billion or something. So it's obscenely large amount of money that the coral reefs provide to the economy. So as the name of the coral reef suggests, it's an ecosystem that is supported mainly by corals, namely what we know as hermatypic scleractinian corals or reef-building corals. These are animals, and with the help of their symbiotic, very important symbiotic zooxanthellae algae, are the ones responsible for producing the calcium carbonate framework supporting the coral reef ecosystem and the rich biodiversity within it. It is estimated that they can accrete up to 6 kilograms of carbonate per square meter per year. And to put into perspective just how much that is, a human body weight is essentially around 15% bone. So these corals can produce what would be up to half my skeleton in a year. And considering I'm quite big bone, that's quite a lot. Anyway, in order for this structural framework to be maintained, there needs to be an equilibrium between the damage done to the reef and its recovery. And although reef recovery can be defined by a whole different bunch of complex factors, from a coral perspective, it can be said to involve biological processes such as coral production, sex, recruitment, babies, and the thing that my research focuses on, their growth, or the less exciting thing between sex and before sex and after baby. So, how exactly do scleractinian hermatypic corals grow? One way of thinking about how corals grow is that these animals build an ever-extending scaffolding, which then forms the guide for the packing of calcium carbonate bricks. And the culmination of which is the calcium carbonate macrostructure of a coral colony we are probably more familiar to seeing on the reef. I guess you can think of these coral structures as self-repairing, ever-increasing HDB blocks that marine life can call home. So coral growth is important for maintaining this framework. Like humans, the growth of corals is a function of the coral's own intrinsic biological code. That means the species of corals, the genotype, the zooxanthellae clades they form symbiosis with, as well as the environment in which they live. So nature as well as nurture. While we cannot yet have a lot of control over their intrinsic biology, we don't have the ability to make Frankenstein corals right now, the 7 billion Homo sapiens inhabiting this earth do exert some form of effect over the environment. And what we are seeing is that more and more coral reefs are subject to increase. Whoops! Sorry. So more and more coral reefs are subject to increasing environmental stress that compromise their performance and threaten to upset the delicate balance between calcium carbonate production and erosion. On a lot of reefs, we find that the rate of damage on the reef structural framework far outweighs its ability to recover. So we normally see this in the reduction of live coral cover, etc., etc. So, and not only are coral reefs facing threats from localized disturbances such as coastal development, eutrophication, where human activities are concentrated, but also more global scale impacts, in particular sea warming and ocean acidification. So these multiple environmental stresses operate at multiple scales, not only across a spatial scale, but also across a temporal one, so they have different frequencies or cycles in which they can occur. They can interact as well and behave synergistically or antagonistically with one another, creating compounding impacts on negating one another's effects on coral growth and reef accretion processes. And so, key question of interest is to figure out where our coral reefs, in order to figure out where our coral reefs are headed in the future, is perhaps how corals have thus far responded to these multiple environmental stresses. And as the old saying goes, you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been, right? So, measuring years and years and years, decades worth of coral response to environmental change is possible. But how does one actually do that in retrospect? I took a long time to finish my PhD, but it wasn't that long. So it's not like you can actually travel back in time. But can you actually travel back in time? So you can. How, I hear you ask? Okay, no, we don't use that kind of machine. We don't use that kind of machine either. And I really wish we had one of those. And the doctor that comes in it. So the time traveling we can do is actually with the coral themselves. So some coral types, like this massive Porites one, can live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, so centuries long even. And what happens is that when we slice these coral open and put them under ultraviolet light or X-ray them, we can see bands in this coral skeleton that are not dissimilar to annual tree rings, and which are essentially growth signatures and can be used to date the calcium carbonate layers which corals lay as they grow. And instead of slicing up whole huge corals though, we can use a non-destructive method and take a core or two through the middle of the coral colony and obtain a samples of the skeleton that has extended for tens or even hundreds of years. So here we can see the bands in the coral and the dating that we do with the bands. And this type of time travel is actually called sclerochronology. Okay, so we know sclerochronology, and once we properly validate this sclerochronology, we can actually use the bands to measure past coral growth rates as well as patterns. So things like how fast they extend in a year, how dense the coral skeleton is. So like human bodies, the density is a measure of the coral's strength, skeletal strength. And then the overall calcification rate of coral. But not only that, through carefully calibrated geochemistry and not forgetting proper replication, we are also able to reconstruct in part the environment in which they live. And here are just some of the geochemical or sort of proxies that have been used to reconstruct past climates and conditions using coral skeleton. So so we can see here you're able to reconstruct temperature, salinity, even heterotrophy of the coral over time. And a couple that I'm really interested in exploring right now is the barium and the luminescence in coral skeleton, which seems to show promising relationship with salinity and turbidity in Singapore waters. It's very, very early stages, and it definitely needs a lot more time, replicates, manpower for proper validation and calibration, but very promising nonetheless, possibly an NPAX fiscal year 2015 project. Okay, so now we know how important coral growth is and how useful coral skeleton can be. And we're at the home stretch now, okay, bear with me a bit longer. So finally, I'd like to share with you the results of a sclerochronology study which has shed light on the status of our corals' growth rates and patterns and how they have changed over time. So we looked at massive varieties skeleton, massive varieties corals like the ones here around Singapore and the region. Okay, so we sampled 22 of these massive varieties colonies from 5 different sites around Singapore and analyzed their growth rate over the period 1980 to 2010. Massive varieties coral is the dominant genera in Singapore and actually in the surrounding region. So any changes we see in their growth rate could suggest a change in the reef scale structural framework accretion rate. So, and as Singaporeans, you know, we are very kaypoh. So in addition to finding out what's going on around Singapore itself, I also collected samples from 5 other locations around the Thai Malay Peninsula to see and compare how they're doing as a region and comparing to what is going on in Singapore. Just to show you how we went about to collect the cores, we used an air drill to operate a coring barrel underwater, and with the blessings of NPAX, yes, I have an NPAX permit for this, obtain coral cores such as these. And you can see here already the bands in the coral quite distinct. And before anybody starts throwing bricks at me for damaging corals, I can assure you this method has been proven to have very minimal impacts on the coral and does not kill the colony. So we only create a 5 centimeter diameter hole, which we eventually patch up with cement plugs or epoxy. And when the cement plugs or epoxy either fall out or itchy hand divers come and take them off, you can see that the holes are closing up on by themselves. But if you're diving in Singapore's reef, you see like a hole in a coral, do let me know. I would like to go and sort of check on it and maybe cover it up. Okay, so after all this, right, after all the collection and everything, we analyzed the data. And what we found was that the calcification rate of massive varieties corals in Singapore had declined significantly by about 17% in the last 30 years. And this decline in calcification was mainly driven by drop in how fast they extended, that means how fast they built their scaffolding. And also we see an indication that maybe something is happening here to the skeletal densities, though not statistically significant at this point. Okay. Please remember skeletal density, and we will revisit this in 2 slides. Okay, so when we compare this calcification, the change in calcification rate in Singapore corals with that of the other reefs in the region, we see this worrying pattern of slowing down of growth rates with a region average decline by 18.6%. This decline is a worry because, again, varieties is a dominant coral genera and indication that reef framework may be compromised. But despite the variation here, you see the slower rate the slower rates of calcification decline in Singapore, and something very different happening at Port Dickson. The pattern of decline indicates that the disturbance driving this region average change is something that is occurring at a larger scale. And when we look at it, we find a significant relationship between this decline in calcification rate with rising sea surface temperatures, where above 29.4 degrees Celsius, the rate of calcification drops drastically. Interestingly, this threshold is quite a few degrees higher compared to what was found at the Great Barrier Reef and various lab experiments, where 27 degrees Celsius seems to be more of their magic number, after which calcification just plummets. So, what does this mean? First and foremost, I think it means that the world didn't end beyond 27 degrees Celsius for the corals around Singapore and around the Thai Malay Peninsula region, and that the thermal thresholds for calcification is likely to be more location-specific rather than universal. I also think it suggests that corals from Singapore and the surrounding region have acclimatized to higher thermal regimes here. Or could it possibly be that there is an interplay of other environmental factors we've actually not accounted for, because a correlation doesn't mean causation, right? Okay, so we've seen this large-scale sea surface temperature rise driving the change in calcification rate. So we should not forget about the localized stresses. So remember skeletal density? So despite the Singapore varieties having a slightly lower rate of decline in calcification rate, the skeletal densities of our corals are way below average compared to the surrounding region. And they hit below 1 gram per cubic centimeter. That means it's actually lower density than water. They will float in water. If you also see the other reefs in the region, right? So this is Singapore Reef. The other reefs in the region that have coral densities falling below this average, these are very, very near-shore reefs where human activities are more prevalent and the reefs experience higher sedimentation rate and possibly other sort of coastal influences, pollution, eutrophication, etc. So, what does this mean? Singapore corals moving towards osteoporosis, and where the structural integrity of our calcium carbonate framework is being compromised, okay, it leaves them to be more susceptible to boring organisms. You see all the different holes here. These are boring organisms, good for boring organism scientists, but not good for the corals. And also to physical damage, breakage, so they're more brittle, so ship grounding is going to have more impact on them, storms, etc., etc. So when looking at global or larger scale impact, we shouldn't forget the localized stresses as well. To conclude, we can use coral skeletons to reconstruct growth rates and other environmental conditions in which they live. Brighties corals in Singapore are growing around 17% slower compared to 30 years ago. Large-scale global stress, in particular sea warming, seems to be driving long-term change in growth rates. But impact from more localized stresses should not be forgotten. That means the lowering of structural integrity associated with reefs, with near-shore reef effects. And understanding local dynamics and managing local stresses is something that we can possibly do, and it's more readily achievable. And although we should think about impacts on a global scale, we should try and act locally. Okay, if you have any questions, please contact me, or you can sort of ambush me during lunch while I'm stuffing my face. Thank you!